On that unlucky Friday, the 13th night of January, at 9:42 p.m., the Concordia, led by Italian captain Francesco Schettino, crashed into rocks just 450 feet from Giglio's shore. The ship had left the port of Civitavecchia, north of Rome, 2.5 hours earlier. Schettino was doing a flyby, essentially diverting the massive liner from its safe sea route between Giglio and the Tuscan mainland, cutting close to the island to blow the horn 3 times in a maritime salute to a former Costa captain who had retired there. A story unfolded that captured the world's attention, leaving a deep mark on maritime history. This is about the Costa Concordia, a huge Italian cruise ship that set out on a journey filled with hopes for adventure and relaxation, but ended in a terrible disaster due to mistakes, carelessness, and a search for justice. Welcome back once again to Docutainment's videos. The Concordia was traveling 15 knots at the time of impact. The force created by the collision was strong enough to break an 80-ton chunk of rock off the seabed, which became embedded in the ship's hull. The Costa Concordia was a massive ship with 13 passenger decks, 1,500 fancy cabins, and all the things you'd want on a cruise. It left the port of Civitavecchia, Italy, for a 7-day trip in the Mediterranean, making stops in lovely places like Barcelona and Marseille. People from different countries and ages were excited about the adventure ahead of them. But at 10:44 p.m., the ship flipped in 60 feet of water, getting stuck on an underwater cliff just a few feet from the island's rocky shore. The person in charge of the ship, Captain Francesco Schettino, was an experienced sailor who liked to show off. He was known for his flashy style, and some people even called him Captain Coward because of his behavior. Little did anyone know that this night would test his abilities and character in a big way. The ship crashed into the rocks, creating a huge hole in its side. The impact caused panic among the passengers and crew. Furniture fell over, glasses broke, and chaos erupted as people rushed to leave their cabins and put on life jackets. At the same time, there was an electrical problem on the ship. The collision with the rocks had caused a power failure in some parts of the ship. This made things even more confusing and made it harder to tell the passengers how serious the situation was. 5 parts of the ship, including the engine room, started filling with water, and the ship lost its power. It was a very serious situation because, without working engines or a steering thing, the ship couldn't be directed. To make things worse, the wind and the stubborn position of the steering thing turned the Concordia back toward an island. Luckily, this change in direction made the later rescue mission a bit easier, but it came with a cost. The ship started leaning to the side, creating a worrisome tilt. In the middle of all this trouble, a scared passenger urgently called her daughter in Italy. The Italian Coast Guard also heard about the problem, calling the Concordia around 10:14 p.m. The ship's captain, Schettino, played down the seriousness of the situation, just saying that it was an electrical issue and told people to go back to their cabins. This was another mistake. However, about 10 minutes later, the truth came out when the crew said that the Concordia was taking on water. Strangely, Schettino's only request at that time was for tugboats. The delay in evacuating the ship caused more problems. As the ship tilted more and water started coming in, it became harder for people to get on the lifeboats. Some people who knew swimming jumped into the cold water to escape as the Giglio island could be seen right at a close distance. As the minutes went by, the Costa Concordia kept tilting, and it ended up on its side in the water. Passengers who couldn't get on lifeboats had to hold on to the ship, waiting for rescue. The ship's crew also did their best to help passengers get off the ship, but the situation was very chaotic. Some lifeboats left without being full, and passengers had a hard time understanding how serious the problem was. The first rescue ship arrived at 10:39 p.m., but it wasn't until around 15 minutes later that Schettino finally said everyone should leave the ship. By then, reports say little boats had already been sent out. Around 11:20 p.m., Schettino left the control room and left the ship, saying he fell off and magically landed in a little boat. 13 minutes later, the last crew member left the control room, leaving about 300 people still on the struggling ship. As the clock struck midnight on January 14, the Concordia leaned a lot, making it hard to release little boats. Many had to use ladders for their escape. At 12:40 am, a Coast Guard captain urgently called Schettino, who was hanging out in a little boat with other Concordia officers. The captain told him to return to the ship and help everyone get off. Shockingly, he said, "No." Meanwhile, the rescue efforts were working hard. A group of 25 patrol boats, 14 merchant vessels, and many helicopters were working nonstop. By early morning, a huge 4194 people were taken from the Concordia to Giglio Island, which usually had less than 1,000 people living there. The story changed when, at 6:17 am on January 14, the search efforts stopped for a bit. However, the next day, divers managed to save 3 more people from inside the Concordia marking, the last survivors. Sadly, the disaster took the lives of 32 people, and the final body wasn't found until November 2014. After the Costa Concordia disaster, there was a big operation to clean up the mess, both in terms of the law and the environment. The shipwreck was a big danger to the sea life around Giglio. Getting the ship back up and floating again was a huge task, and 3 days after the Costa Concordia disaster, the Italian environment minister urgently said, "The environmental risk is very high, and we need to respond quickly." The main goal was to stop the fuel from getting out of the ship. The ship's tanks had about 2,400 tons of thick and heavy fuel oil. A team was there to try to make the ship safer and prevent any pollution. Luckily, the cruise ship had 2 layers of hull, which made the risk of a big oil spill lower. They used special booms to surround the wreck and stop pollution from spreading if the fuel oil got into the sea. On the 18th, the French maritime folks sent equipment and a special ship for dealing with oil spills, just in case. To prepare for a possible spill at sea, Sader and Météo France used a model called MOTHY to simulate how the fuel oil would spread. This information was important to decide how to respond if there was a leak. Getting the fuel out of the ship was a big job. The cruise ship owner hired a Dutch company, SMIT, and an Italian company, NERI, to do it. Because of the temperature in the area, they had to heat up the thick fuel before pumping it out. They connected a floating barge to the underwater tanks and stored the recovered fuel on it. Then, they moved it to an oil tanker next to the barge. First, they emptied 6 big tanks in the front of the Costa Concordia, which had 67% of the fuel. It took 2.5 months to empty all 15 double-hulled tanks. To keep the ship balanced, they added water to the tanks while moving the fuel onto the barge. After making sure the environment was safe, the next challenge was what to do with the wreck. The Costa Concordia was on some rocks and could slide off and sink even deeper into 100 meters of water nearby. They had a few options to get rid of the wreck. 1. Fix the ship's hull with big metal plates to make it float, and then tow it to a port to break it down. 2. Put buoys around the wreck to make it float. 3. Take it apart right there. But first, they needed to remove everything from inside, like rooms, a theater, a cinema, 13 bars, and all the oil and chemicals. But the insurance company said the ship was too broken. Costa Cruises, the company that owned the Costa Concordia, chose the first option. They asked for help from around the world and picked a U.S. company called Titan Salvage, along with an Italian company called Micaperi. In May 2012, after getting permission, Titan Salvage and Micaperi showed their plan to Costa Cruises. The plan had 3 steps: make the wreck float, take it to an Italian port, and clean the seabed. About 400 experts and 100 divers worked on it. They used 11 systems to check if the Costa Concordia was stable. Before lifting the ship, they did a lot of engineering work. They figured out exactly where the ship was broken and where they could attach things to turn it. They made 6 underwater platforms for the wreck to rest on after turning it. They attached about 34,000 cubic meters tanks to the hull to turn the ship. They called it the parbuckling operation and make it float. After over a year of work, they started turning the ship. The efforts paid off, and the Costa Concordia was successfully turned during the night of September 16 to 17, 2013. A lot of people around the world watched the big 290-meter ship being turned through live streaming. After turning it, they checked how broken the ship was. On July 14, 2014, the Costa Concordia, surrounded by big watertight tanks, rose 2 meters off the seabed and was successfully floated. The CEO of Costa Croziers, Michael Tam, said the operation has already cost an eye-watering $1 billion and will top $2 billion or more by the time it's done. That's more than 3 times the $612 million that it cost to build in 2004. It became one of the most expensive operations ever to save a ship at sea. On the other hand, in the courtroom, Captain Francesco Schettino faced criminal charges for what he did. He was found guilty of causing death and leaving the ship. In 2015, he was sent to prison for 16 years. Plus, the compensation package offered to surviving passengers of the Costa Concordia disaster was worth €11,000. The crew was reimbursed differently, being paid their full wages for either 2 months or the remainder of their contract, whichever was longer. Because of the Costa Concordia disaster, the cruise industry had to make important changes. New rules and safety measures were made to stop similar accidents. They paid more attention to training the crew and making sure everyone knew how to handle problems. I hope you like, subscribe, and share this video of Docutainment. Thank you so much for your kind comments. See you in the next awesome video.